Hello guys, welcome to Dr. Night Stare. I know you guys come here to relax and take a nap. So before we go, please hit like and subscribe. By the way, also tell me what time and where you guys listening from. Alright then. Liam spent his childhood immersed in the tranquil embrace of Willow Creek Forest. It was his sanctuary, a peaceful refuge from the cacophony of the world, a boundless canvas for his wild imagination, where his thoughts could soar unconfined. But time, an unstoppable current, carried him into his teenage years. Visits to the forest grew sporadic, then ceased altogether. What was once a vibrant realm of childhood serenity faded into a mere memory. The days of building elaborate forts and embarking on grand expeditions to the winding creek were replaced by other pursuits. He had simply grown up. It wasn't a wrenching farewell. More akin to the quiet realization that your beloved toys aren't truly alive. You are merely lending them your voice. That's how Willow Creek Forest began to feel. A place where his imagination had once projected life, now a quiet, inanimate space. He understood that this boundless creativity had become a distraction from the tangible demands of school and burgeoning social life. It had to be reined in. Years passed. In his 20s, Liam left his parents' old farmhouse in Maplewood Valley and secured an apartment in Capital City. He was an accountant, drawn by the convenience of proximity to his work. The city's pulse invigorated him. The blare of horns, the ceaseless hum of activity, the bright, insistent glow of the urban night. This was his new normal. It was here he forged his success, carving out a name for himself, even if only for himself. An accountant at an anonymous bank in a sprawling city wasn't fame or fortune, but it represented a profound personal achievement, a foundation of security he'd built for himself. He remained there for 10 years, 10 solitary years in that capital city apartment, a decade of quiet in his mind. Then, on his 32nd birthday, the call came that irrevocably altered his life's course, pulling him back to the verdant countryside of Maplewood Valley, from which he'd sprung. He would never forget the uncontrolled hysteria of his Aunt Eleanor, her wrenching sobs chilling him to the bone, sinking his heart into his stomach. His parents were dead, brutally, and his aunt had found them. His urban life hadn't severed the bonds of affection or communication with his parents. The news shattered him, leaving him utterly heartbroken and bewildered. Just the night before, he'd been texting his mother. She was organizing his birthday dinner, a cherished tradition. "No matter how old you are, you'll always be my baby," she'd often say. They were in the midst of choosing a restaurant when the conversation abruptly shifted. Instead of responding to his query about the steakhouse or the Outback, her reply was stark. "I miss you so much. Please come home." Liam was 31, a man grown. His mother had accepted his departure a decade ago, even welcomed it as a sign of a job well done, a new chapter for her and his father. He typed back, "I miss you too. Is anything wrong? I'll see you both tomorrow, right?" A 5-minute eternity passed, marked by the rhythmic bounce of the gray text bubbles on his screen. When her response finally appeared, it was just 2 words, "Come home." Confused but not yet alarmed, he replied, "I'll see what I can do tomorrow. Maybe I'll spend the weekend with you guys." The message was read, but no further reply came. He assumed they'd pick up the conversation in the morning and decided to call it a night. And of course, he now knew what had happened. His aunt had discovered them along the tree line, mangled and bloody, flies already beginning to swarm their corpses. At least that's how he pictured it. Aunt Eleanor was too distraught to offer more detail than they were dead in the woods. The news necessitated an immediate journey back to Maplewood Valley, a long drive to the deep country of Vermont. He called his boss, who, with genuine sympathy, granted him all the time he needed. "Come back when you feel ready," he'd said. Liam thanked him profusely, packed a bag for a few days. He didn't know how long he'd stay, but he wanted to be prepared. On the drive, skyscrapers receded, yielding to suburbs, then vast fields, then dense forests. A pang of nostalgia struck him, recalling his formative years in the simpler world. He remembered how his parents had guided him, nurturing his growth, encouraging him to explore beyond their familiar surroundings. Tree after tree blurred past his window, and his thoughts inevitably settled on his time in Willow Creek Forest. Tears welled up, a profound sense of loss for a childhood that felt definitively gone, leaving only echoes in his mind. Soon, he was openly sobbing as his car sped down the highway. After 3 hours, his wheels finally met the familiar dirt road leading to his parents' old farmhouse. His heart began to pound. He questioned if he was truly ready to confront this devastating reality. But he pressed on. Soon, the familiar outline of the old farmhouse, its weathered wood, a monument to his youth, emerged from the distant tree line. Each glimpse brought with it a fresh wave of grief that overwhelmed his soul and stung his eyes. He pulled into the driveway, where Aunt Eleanor and Uncle Ben sat on the porch. Uncle Ben held his aunt, gently rocking her. As Liam parked and hurried out to greet them, he could have sworn he heard his name called from behind him. He looked back, seeing only the trees swaying in the crisp evening air. Shaking it off, he embraced them. Aunt Eleanor was still inconsolable. Uncle Ben offered what comfort he could. They sat together for a while, sharing old memories, punctuated by laughter mixed with tears. Mostly, they were consumed by shock and sorrow. A thought suddenly pierced through Liam's grief. "Wait," he said, "where are the police?" An uncomfortable silence stretched before Uncle Ben finally spoke. Case was open and shut. Their work here is done. Liam stared in disbelief. His parents had been murdered, and it was resolved in a single day? How is that even possible? He managed to ask. Animal attack, Uncle Ben replied grimly. Their wounds were consistent with a bear mauling. That's what they labeled it, and that's what it will stay. Liam winced. This was absolutely not what he wanted to hear. All right, let's just change the subject. Where are you two staying tonight? Are you even staying? Dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, Aunt Eleanor answered groggily. We've got a hotel near town. We'll be there through the funeral. What about you? He paused, considering. He knew where he wanted to be, but wasn't sure it was appropriate or how they'd react. I was thinking of staying here tonight. Just one last time. I think I need to. To his surprise, they didn't argue. They accepted, even seemed to understand. They chatted a bit longer before saying their goodbyes. Liam watched their car disappear down the dirt road, their taillights fading into the darkness until he was alone again. The cool night air kissed his face. After a few moments on the porch, he stepped inside. The old farmhouse felt hollow. It was fully furnished, but profoundly empty, an absence he felt deep in his soul. He walked through the rooms, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. His parents' bedroom hurt the most. He could only glance inside for a few agonizing moments before grief forced him to close the door. What affected him most, however, was his childhood bedroom. It was untouched, dirty clothes still on the floor, sheets hanging loosely from the bed. With a sigh, he collapsed onto his mattress, the springs groaning beneath his weight. He lay there, curled up, clutching his blanket tightly. His thoughts began to blur, his eyelids growing heavy as sleep beckoned. Before it could claim him, a sharp, rhythmic tapping came from his window, a quick, urgent pop-pop-pop that jolted him awake. Usually, in movies, the sound would abruptly cease. But here, it intensified, becoming quicker, wilder, more forceful. He was terrified, almost paralyzed. At first, he tried to shout, "Whoever's out there, I'm armed. Get off my property or I will shoot, shoot." The response was the voice of a child. "I see you, shoot, you," it drawled. He was out of bed in an instant, peering through the curtains. All he saw was a small boy running into the depths of Willow Creek Forest. He couldn't let him go, not after what had happened to his parents. Grabbing a flashlight and pulling on his shoes, he rushed out the front door. He reached the tree line and stopped. Something warned him not to go further, whispered that he was making a grave mistake. But a voice from the forest pierced through his judgment. "Come play with me again, Liam," it beckoned. He knew he'd heard his name earlier. He wasn't crazy. Against every fiber of his being, he stepped into the woods. As he walked, he heard his own footsteps, then the distinct crunch of leaves just beyond his line of sight. He pressed deeper until he stumbled upon something familiar, one of his old forts. one of the last ones he'd built before he stopped playing in these woods. Inside was himself, as a boy, smiling up at him. Its teeth were sharp flecks of flesh wedged between them. Its nails were like talons caked with dirt and dried blood, and its eyes, oh God, its eyes. They were a deep crimson, so dark they would have looked black if not for the faint moonlight. "You're home," it clapped, the sound chilling. Liam stood frozen, absolutely petrified. "I knew you'd be back. I knew I'd get you back. I knew I'd get you back." It hissed, barely containing its erratic excitement. The thing began to rise, and finally, Liam's body reacted. He ran, faster than his legs had ever carried him, ducking and weaving through branches and roots. To his utter horror, the creature kept pace, running beside him, its dark eyes fixed on him, its unwavering smile a gruesome mask. Adrenaline surged through him. He'd never run faster in his life, not even in high school track. He was absolutely flying. The porch lights of the farmhouse came into view. As soon as he reached the steps, he practically vaulted over them, bursting inside. Grabbing his car keys, he was back in his vehicle, peeling out of the driveway, before he even fully registered what was happening. He must have been halfway down the dirt road, en route back to Capital City, before he remembered to breathe. Regaining a semblance of composure, his hands gripped the steering wheel as he sped through the darkness. He swore he would never return to that house. He'd drive back and forth for the funeral, whatever it took. But that tiny comfort, that fleeting sense of escape, was brutally dashed when a voice came from his back seat. "Where are we going?" He looked in his rearview mirror. There he was again. Sitting with hands in his lap, a blank expression on his face. Liam nearly crashed the car in his frenzied attempt to pull over. Once he did, the back seat was empty. He thought he was losing his mind. After searching the car like a frantic police officer, he finally forced himself to start driving again. He made it all the way back to Capital City without incident. His apartment, though, that's another story entirely. He didn't know how it got there. He didn't know how it followed him. But it was there, and it wouldn't leave. He found it standing motionless in his bedroom, staring out the window, hands clasped behind its back. The moment it sensed his presence, its head rotated a full 180 degrees to face him. "Do you want to play now?" it asked. Liam slammed the bedroom door, backing away slowly. He heard footsteps approaching from the other side, but they stopped just before reaching the door. Ever so cautiously, he pushed the door open. His room was empty, just like the car. Sleep was impossible that night. He chose instead to stay on his balcony, too afraid to admit he had truly lost his mind. The next day, his phone exploded with calls from Aunt Eleanor and Uncle Ben. They wanted to know where he was. He lied, telling them that staying in the farmhouse was too painful, and he'd return to his apartment. He assured them he'd be at the funeral and would be there if they needed anything. That entire day, the boy plagued his mind. It wouldn't stop appearing, in the bathroom, in the kitchen. It even followed him to the grocery store. He was the only one who could see it, blood still dripping from its mouth and hands, and he was the only one who seemed to notice. At the funeral, it sat beside him during the service, begging him to play the entire time. It screamed at him, taunted him, berated him with a torrent of insults. While the rest of his family mourned, Liam couldn't even shed a tear in peace without this grotesque version of his younger self demanding his interaction. This has been happening ever since his parents' deaths, and he still hasn't found a way to rid himself of this monstrosity he was certain had killed them. Even now, as he writes this, it's leaning over his shoulder, whispering in his ear, begging him to go to the woods with it. And he thinks he's finally going to. Eleanor lived on Cedar Ridge Lane, a secluded cottage overlooking Whispering Pines Gulch, just past the old mill pond. The area was remote, her nearest neighbors several miles away. She knew if she ever had to call for help, a standard patrol car wouldn't be nearly enough. Every unit the authorities could spare would be needed. It had all started about 4 hours ago. The weather in this mountain region was notoriously fickle, but today's storm seemed to bear a personal grudge against her cottage. The wind howled as if trying to tear the shingles from the roof, and the rain battered the windows with a violence that made her jump with every clap of thunder. She'd lived alone since her mother passed, and the isolation, usually her sanctuary, felt like a cage on nights like this. She was in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, attempting to watch an old movie to drown out the storm's fury, when the emergency alert on her phone shrieked. That shrill, aggressive sound always made her heart stop. The notification glowed red on the screen. Public safety alert. Highly dangerous patient escaped from Stonehaven Mental Health Facility. Suspect, Marcus Thorne. Male, Caucasian, 6'3". History of extreme violence. Last confirmed location, outskirts of Whispering Pines Gulch. Lock doors and windows. Do not interact. Call police immediately if sighted. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Whispering Pines Gulch bordered her backyard. As a woman living alone, an obvious target, she reacted instantly. She turned off the TV. The silence of the house, broken only by the rain, became suffocating. She rushed to check the locks. Front door secured. Back door secured. Downstairs windows, in the deepening gloom of the house. As she headed to the fridge for a glass of water, she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a branch scraping against the wall. It was the unmistakable, heavy sound of a boot stepping onto the wooden deck of the back porch. The wood groaned under human weight. Eleanor froze. Her breath hitched. She killed all the downstairs lights, plunging the cottage into darkness, guided only by the intermittent lightning flashes. She crawled to the kitchen, where a sheer curtain offered a partial view of the porch. Another step, more of a drag this time. Then, the sound of metal scratching against metal. Someone was testing the doorknob. Panic was a strange thing. You expected to scream, but her voice vanished. She huddled against the counter, gripping her phone so hard her knuckles turned white. She tried to call the police, but the call wouldn't connect. No service. Damn it, the sound at the door ceased. Absolute silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then, a brutal pounding. Paulus, open the door. A deep, authoritative voice shouted over the sound of the rain. Eleanor almost sobbed with relief. She peeked through the gap in the curtain. A strong beam of light from a tactical flashlight swept the windows. The man held the flashlight in one hand and what looked like a gun in the other. He wore a dark raincoat and a cap with the local ranger insignia. "Ma'am, we know you're in there." He shouted again, his voice hoarse with urgency. "The suspect is in your backyard. Open up now for your own safety." She didn't think twice. The terror of the monster outside eclipsed any caution. She unlocked the door and threw it open. He surged inside like a whirlwind, bringing with him the smell of rain and mud. The officer immediately pushed the door shut, securing both locks and sliding the deadbolt. "Stay away from the windows," he ordered, pointing the gun at the locked door in a perfect defensive stance. "He tried to get in right behind me." Eleanor was shaking, leaning against the fridge. "Who? The patient, Marcus Thorne?" she asked. The officer turned to her, lowering the gun slightly, but not holstering it. "Yes, ma'am. Marcus Thorne. My patrol spotted him crossing your property line. My partner, Thompson, is out there trying to catch him, but he's fast." "Did he cut the power to the area?" the officer asked. Only then did Eleanor notice that the fridge light hadn't turned on when she opened it minutes before hearing the noise at the door. I think so," she replied. "Bastard," he grumbled, wiping his wet face with his hand. He took off his cap, revealing short, military-style hair. "I'm Officer Davis. I'm sorry to scare you, but we needed to secure the internal perimeter. Are you alone?" "Yes, just me." He nodded, serious. "Good. Fewer lives at risk. Listen, let's keep the house dark. Thorne is an opportunistic predator. If he sees light, he attacks. Let's go to the kitchen. It's the most central room." Eleanor obeyed. She felt safe. Despite the cliché of not being able to call the authorities when she absolutely needed to, they were already alert in the area. They went to the kitchen. The officer pulled up a chair and placed it facing the hallway that led to the living room, from where he could watch both entrances. He told her to sit on the floor behind the kitchen island, out of the line of fire. "Do "Do you have any weapons in the house, ma'am?" he asked, his voice calm, controlled. "No, just kitchen knives. Leave them in the drawers. In high-stress situations, civilians tend to hurt themselves more than they help. Leave the protection to me. It's what I'm trained for." Hours passed. The storm outside worsened. Every now and then, Officer Davis would raise a hand asking for silence, tilt his head as if listening to something on the radio clipped to his belt, and then relax. "What's happening?" Eleanor would whisper. "My partner, Thompson. He found tracks leading to the old shed. They're sweeping the area." While they waited, the policeman started making small talk to calm her down. He asked what she did for a living, how long she had lived there. He told her he had a daughter her age, that she was in college. He said he hated night shifts on rainy days because his arthritis flared up in his knee. At one point, he asked for water. Eleanor got up to get a glass. "Thank you," he said, smiling. It was the first time he smiled. That was when the little things started to bother her. First, it was the radio. Davis spoke to his partner, but the radio never emitted any sound. No static, no voices. He just put his hand to his ear, nodded, and relayed the information to her. She justified it to herself. Maybe he's using an earpiece, I don't know. Second, the gun. When he put the gun on the table to drink the water, she noticed the metal looked too old. Rusty in some spots. Rangers took obsessive care of their weapons, didn't they? That looked like a revolver that had been dug up from a backyard. But she was too afraid of Marcus Thorne to question Officer Davis. After all, who was she? A graphic designer who got scared of her own shadow. He was the professional. Then the rain let up a bit. Silence reigned again. "It's too quiet," Davis said, frowning. "I'm going to try to contact dispatch to see if the transport van is on its way." He stood up and walked to the living room window, peeking through the crack. Eleanor sat in the chair he had vacated. His raincoat was folded on the table. He had taken it off about an hour ago because it was warm inside. Under the coat, he wore a navy blue uniform. It looked legitimate from a distance, but now, with the candle she had lit being the only source of light, she was close enough to see the details. There were stains on the shirt. Dark, brown, dry stains. Old blood, mud. She lifted the embroidery on the chest. It said, Davis. But the thread was loose, as if the name had been stitched in a hurry or ripped from somewhere else and tacked on there. Her heart began to beat in a painful, irregular rhythm. She looked at the silver badge pinned to the shirt pocket. It shone in the candlelight. It looked like metal. She leaned forward, squinting. It wasn't metal. It was a piece of cardboard cut into a star shape, covered with aluminum foil. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Her vision blurred. In the center of the foil star, where the identification number should have been embossed, there were crude, childish numbers. Chaff 4815. Written with blue crayon. The wax was accumulated on the edges of the numbers, that vibrant blue that children use to color the sky. The world spun. She looked at his belt. The holster was empty because the gun was on the table, but the radio. It wasn't a real radio. It was a block of wood painted black with a wire antenna stuck in the top. There was no Officer Davis. There was no partner outside. There was no radio. The emergency alert. Marcus Thorne. Psychiatric patient. She raised her eyes slowly. He was standing in the kitchen doorway watching her. He wasn't looking at the window anymore. Now, he was looking at her. The paternal, worried expression had vanished. His face was relaxed, blank, almost, curious. Like a child who has just pulled the wings off a fly and is waiting to see what it will do. Did the signal come back, he asked. His voice wasn't hoarse and authoritative anymore. It was higher, almost sing-song. Her phone, which was in her pocket, she hadn't given it to him, thank God, vibrated against her leg. Eleanor forced a smile. God knows where she found the strength, but she smiled. No, not yet, Officer Davis. I was just admiring your badge. It shines so bright. His eyes gleamed with pride. He touched the foil-covered cardboard on his chest. Yeah, I polished it myself. Gotta look presentable for duty, right? Right, she agreed, feeling the dryness in her throat. Officer. If you'll excuse me, I need to use the bathroom. It's the nerves. He tilted his head, analyzing. He took a step forward, blocking the hallway that led to the bathroom and the exit. Better not. Thompson said Thorne might be trying to get in through the air vents. The bathroom has a large window. It's dangerous. Stay here, with me. He pulled the chair closer to her. So close she could smell him now that the rain had dried. It was rancid sweat, old urine, and something metallic, like coins held for too long in a sweaty hand. The smell of an institution, the smell of neglect. You know, he whispered, leaning over the table, his eyes fixed on hers. I protected a lot of people today, before coming here. You did, she asked. Yes. I stopped a car on the highway. There was a family. The dad didn't want to roll down the window, but I showed him the badge. Then he opened it. I had to save all of them. They were screaming a lot. The bad voices were in them. I had to take the voices out. The fake Officer Davis looked at his own hands, then at the rusty gun on the table. It got very quiet after. I liked the silence. But you're nice. You gave me water. He picked up the gun and started spinning it on the table, the barrel pointing now at the wall, now at her. I think Thorne is gone, he said, suddenly serious. I think now it's just us. We can play house. I'm the daddy. You're the mommy. Daddy protects mommy. But mommy has to obey daddy. He stood up and went to the fridge. Daddy is hungry. What's for dinner? While the madman had his back turned, rummaging through her fridge in the dark, Eleanor pulled her phone out of her pocket. The signal was flickering, just one bar. She saw the news update. Marcus Thorne's mugshot. It was him. Without the cap, without the raincoat, it was undeniable. The news detailed that Marcus Thorne had killed a park ranger, stealing his uniform. He'd lost the ranger's service weapon during his escape, instead pilfering an old revolver from a secluded general store. It said he suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia and delusions of grandeur, where he believed he was an authority figure. He was humming now. A lullaby. He was cutting cheese with one of her kitchen knives. The knife he had told her not to use. Eleanor knew she couldn't run. He was huge and stood between her and the door. The windows were locked, and if she tried to open them, the noise would alert him. Her only chance was to keep pretending she believed in his fantasy until help arrived. But he just stopped humming. He closed the fridge door slowly. "Honey?" he called out, without turning around. "Why is your phone light on under the table?" Daddy said, "Light attracts the monsters." He was turning around slowly. The knife was in his hand. The crayon badge shone faintly in the candlelight. He was smiling again, that smile that didn't reach his eyes. Serafina, my dearest friend, had always been the epitome of grace and kindness. Her smile alone could brighten the darkest of my days, and her unwavering support was a constant in my life. Beyond her truly golden spirit, Serafina possessed a captivating beauty that drew admiration from everyone she met. She was, in essence, pure and guileless, almost to a fault. Then, a shift began. It started subtly, when she confided in me her desire to explore uncharted territories, not the usual youthful escapades, but rather ancient lore, spirit summoning, and forgotten rituals. I voiced my concerns, cautioning her against delving into such mysteries, but she held firm, reminding me of our pact to always stand by each other. I agreed not to interfere, though I couldn't bring myself to endorse what I felt were dangerous pursuits. Months passed, and our paths continued to cross within the bustling halls of Oak Haven College. At first, she seemed unchanged, the familiar Serafina I had always known. But a slow, insidious transformation was unfolding, much like a chrysalis yielding something entirely different, only this was no beautiful metamorphosis. The sweet girl who once offered warmth to all began to reserve her kindness exclusively for men. Her prior conviction to wait for true commitment vanished, replaced by a reckless abandon that embraced fleeting encounters. Her authentic spirit, once so vibrant, dimmed and receded, leaving behind a singular, burning desire for male attention. Her conversations became fixated on conquests, and she would tear down other women, even her own friends, with cruel words and veiled threats, all in pursuit of holding the male gaze. Initially, I rationalized her behavior as a desperate plea for validation, a sign of hidden insecurities. But the truth slowly dawned on me. It wasn't her. The person who walked the campus, bore Serafina's face, moved within her social circle, and spoke with her voice was not the Serafina I knew. She began an alarming pattern, becoming intimately involved with nearly every young man across campus. And then the disappearances started. A date with Serafina, followed by a young man vanishing without a trace within days. The pattern became undeniable, chilling, and screaming for intervention. I wish I had been the one to stop her. I often replay scenarios in my mind, imagining how I might have saved her before it was too late. Instead, it was the authorities who brought it to an end. She was apprehended in an isolated clearing just outside Havenwood, attempting to accost a young man who was merely passing through town. The official reports offered little clarity. Witnesses spoke of Serafina's eyes shifting in color, of guttural screams and unnatural screeches echoing through the night. The victim himself was found in a state of profound exhaustion. His statement to the police was stark. It felt as though my very soul was being drawn out of me, every fiber of my being utterly drained. I know, with every fiber of my being, that it wasn't Serafina performing those heinous acts. Whatever dark force she had dabbled with had consumed her, stolen my friend. And one day, I will uncover what it truly is. Clara knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that her time was running out. Every word she tried to form, every memory she tried to grasp, felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Soon, she feared, there would be nothing left of her that remembered how to be whole, nothing but what the apartment chose to keep. She understood how dramatic that sounded, how it would be dismissed as a fever dream, but the truth was, she suspected her existence had already been largely overwritten, confined now to these suffocating walls. A month ago, Clara's life had been normal. She lived with the man she loved, having uprooted her entire world to follow him to the bustling city of Asteria. She'd left behind what little family she had and her small circle of friends, foolishly believing this was her chance at a true, shared future. 3 years they had been together, through arguments and reconciliations she thought had only strengthened their bond. They spoke of children, of time stretching endlessly before them. She had been wrong. One morning, her partner awoke quiet. Too quiet. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He sat on the edge of their bed, hands twisted in the sheets, and delivered the phrase that sounded hollow, unreal. He needed space. By that evening, the space he needed encompassed their entire apartment, and Clara was the thing that didn't belong. There were no shouts, no tears from him, just a calm, almost gentle finality that somehow made it worse. He had clearly made this decision long ago. For him, it was already over. For Clara, her life ended in a single day. She had no family to turn to, having burned too many bridges trying to keep her own head above water. Her few remaining friends lived states away, their couches unavailable. The job she'd moved for barely covered her half of their old rent. Alone, it was impossible. So there she stood, with one suitcase, a backpack, a dying phone battery, and nowhere to go but out into the indifferent city night. It was stark how quickly life narrowed. Goals, dreams, 5-year plans, they dissolved into immediate, primal questions. Where would she sleep? What could she eat without money? How long until the locks changed? Nursing a coffee she couldn't afford in a cheap diner, Clara scrolled through rental listings like obituaries. Everything was too expensive, too far, too demanding of proof of income she no longer fully possessed. Then she found it. Studio apartment. The Pendulum Lofts, app $350 a month. Immediate move-in. No deposit. No credit check. No questions. If such a listing had crossed her path a month prior, alarm bells would have screamed. But desperation mutes common sense. It felt like a lifeline, a hand reaching into a drowning pit. She didn't question the impossible price, the lack of interior photos, or the small gray letters that read, "Vacant long term." She only saw immediate. She called. A man answered on the second ring, as if waiting. "Yeah," he affirmed when she inquired about the unit. "You can come by today if you want." There was no application, no awkward tour. He met her in a dusty lobby, slid a clipboard across a small table, and pointed to a signature line. His eyes were tired, betraying a weariness that made Clara feel guilty for simply existing. "Place has been empty a while," he explained, handing her the key. "People like newer buildings these days." Even then, it hadn't sounded convincing. Now, it was chilling. The first time Clara stepped into apartment 3B, it felt unremarkable. Beige walls, scuffed floorboards, a kitchen that had seen better decades. The air hung stale and faintly sour, a scent of disuse. But it was quiet. It was hers. For the first time since that morning, she closed the door, and no one waited on the other side to tell her to leave. She slept on the floor that night, her hoodie a pillow, her suitcase a nightstand. She cried, not in loud sobs, but in the dry, exhausted way where her face crumpled and her body shook, but no tears came. It would be okay, she told herself. A place, a starting point, she could rebuild. She truly believed it. The next morning, her wallet was in the freezer, encrusted with frost. She stared at it, her mind scrambling for an explanation. Exhaustion? Grief? Induced amnesia? A hollow laugh escaped her lips. "You're really nailing this new start thing, Clara," she muttered. But a sliver of unease had already taken root. It hadn't levitated there. If anyone moved it, it had to be her. She forced herself to be more careful, more attentive. It didn't matter. The next day, the bathroom door handle felt wrong. A few inches closer to the hall than she remembered. Muscle memory, she reasoned, still accustomed to her old apartment's layout. But the doubt, once sown, began to spread like a crack in glass. On the third morning, Clara woke to find her suitcase fully unpacked. Shirts folded in drawers, jeans hung, toiletries lined up on the bathroom sink, even her socks paired. A chore she rarely bothered with. She couldn't recall doing any of it. No vague flash of the act, just a blank. "You're tired. You're sad. People forget things," she whispered. She started leaving her phone's voice recorder on while she slept, desperate to prove her own sanity. The first playback was 8 hours of soft breathing, occasional mattress shifts, and the distant hum of pipes. No footsteps, no sounds of drawers, no rustling. Yet, when she checked the apartment, the living room couch had moved 6 inches to the left. It was around then that she found the first note. She dropped her razor, and retrieving it, her fingers brushed a folded scrap of paper taped behind the toilet tank. "Stop sleeping if you want to stay, you," it read in jagged, hurried script. A shiver ran down her spine, but she dismissed it as a leftover prank, edgy graffiti from a previous tenant. Then she found the second note under the fridge, which had rattled strangely every time she walked past. When she pulled the fridge forward, a folded paper slid out. The dust beneath was undisturbed. "The doors move when you do." Clara didn't laugh this time. She began to search, tearing through cabinets, feeling under drawer liners. The apartment didn't make her work hard. In the cabinet above the sink, faintly penciled on the back panel, was a new phrase. "It rearranges us first." The word "us" landed in her gut like a stone. She stared until her eyes burned. The kitchen light buzzing above her. The muffled sounds of the city outside a stark contrast to the curling dread inside her small studio. She tried to tell herself the previous tenants were simply troubled, but her own fear was becoming too real. From then on, the changes accelerated. She'd walk from the kitchen to the bathroom, and the hallway felt 2 steps longer, her body registering the shift a split second before her brain caught up. The bathroom mirror seemed taller one morning, the towel rack lower, the light switch on the opposite side of the frame. She'd grope for a switch that wasn't there. "The old place," she'd insist, her pulse pounding. Her place. It's not the same layout, but her vision trembled. Objects moved. The mattress shifted closer to the window. The kitchen table edged toward the door. Once, she woke with her head at the foot of the bed and her shoes lined up neatly beside her face, toes pointed inward, as if they had been watching her sleep. Clara stopped sleeping well, jolting awake with the sick feeling that someone had just exited the room. Her dreams were of endless hallways and identical rooms. She became hyper-aware of the walls, of the creaks that seemed to answer her breathing. She held her breath and swore she could hear the apartment exhale. On day 9, a meaningless demarcation in the stretching, sleepless time, Clara noticed the vent cover in the main room was crooked, screws pulled out just enough to expose a thin slice of darkness. Against her better judgment, she dragged a chair over. Behind the vent, pressed tightly into the duct, was a shoebox. Dust cascaded onto her face as she yanked it free. Inside were photos. Some old, some newer, all taken in this apartment. An older man staring with hollow eyes. A woman crouched in a kitchen corner, hands clamped over her ears. A child, blurred in a doorway. And a Polaroid dated 6 years ago, showing a man in the middle of the main room, shoulders slumped. Behind him, the apartment was wrong. The hallway longer or narrower. The perspective off, like an optical illusion. The bathroom door where her kitchen window should be. She slammed the lid back on the box, pushing it away like a threat. It didn't immediately occur to her that if these photos were here, these people weren't. Not until she found the tapes. They were in the coat closet. Her jacket sleeve caught on a nail, pulling back a slice of drywall to reveal a narrow cavity filled with junk. Old receipts, a cracked phone, mismatched socks, and a small camcorder, battery compartment crusted with age. She found a charger at a pawn shop 2 blocks away. A rational part of her urged her to throw the camera out, but curiosity, like desperation, makes one ignore warnings. The battery took a charge. Against her better judgment, she hit play on the first file. The screen lit up with the same walls she was sitting between. The man from the Polaroid sat on the floor, back against the bathroom door, hair in sweaty clumps. His voice shook. "If anyone finds this," he whispered, don't move in here. It learns you." I know that sounds crazy. I thought it was me at first. Stress, drinking, whatever. I thought I was just losing it. He laughed, a frayed sound, eyes darting, as if expecting the apartment to interrupt. "It moves things. Just little things at first. You'll think you're doing it. That's how it gets you. It makes you doubt yourself. Then it starts changing the rooms. The doors don't stay put. You wake up and the hallway is longer, or the bathroom's on the wrong side. You try to leave and end up back where you started. The video glitched, static crawling down the screen. When the image stabilized, he was closer, sitting where Clara sat now. He looked straight into the camera. "Once it knows you," he whispered, "it keeps you." The footage cut off. Clara sat there in the silence, listening to the camcorder's soft wheeze and the frantic thud of her own heart. Her reflection in the darkened screen looked pale and stretched. Hearing someone else describe her nightmare didn't make it less real. It only meant someone else had been awake before her. After that, everything worsened. Sometimes the space between the front door and the wall increased. Sometimes it shrank. Once, she reached for the knob and her hand closed on empty air. No door, just unbroken wall. She blinked, and it was back. The cheap ceiling light in the main room seemed higher each day. The kitchen felt narrower, forcing her shoulders inward. The bathroom mirror showed more wall behind her than there should have been. Her keys, placed on the counter, would reappear on the floor. A faucet she swore she'd turned off would run. Food she didn't remember buying. Half a jar of pickles, a slice of birthday cake, a Chinese takeout box with someone else's handwriting would appear in her fridge. The handwriting itself started showing up in the margins of her own notebooks. Sometimes it looked like hers, sometimes like a stranger's, sometimes like a crude imitation. Little notes. It remembers where you stood. Stop trying to leave. It's been longer than you think. Clara started experiencing memory gaps. Not small, everyday lapses, but entire evenings gone. She'd look up and realize the light had changed, with no recollection of what she'd done. Once she came to standing in the bathroom, hands pressed flat against the mirror. Written across the glass in soap, in her handwriting, were the words, "You're a part of the layout now." She wiped it away so fast, she cut her knuckle on the frame. She no longer knew how long she'd been there. The days stopped lining up, her phone's clock glitching, resetting to strange times, even jumping years. Calls wouldn't go through. Texts lingered in limbo, eventually failing to send or vanishing entirely. The few people she'd managed to contact early on either didn't respond or sent one-word replies that didn't sound like them. Had she even called them? Had she dreamed their voices? It grew harder to separate what she knew from what the apartment wanted her to think. She found other things: an envelope of expired IDs under a floorboard, a ring at the back of a kitchen drawer, dusty glasses atop a cabinet. None of it hers, all of it in her home. Sometimes, late at night, when she sat very still, Clara swore she could feel the apartment thinking. Not with a mind exactly, but with intention. The walls felt too close, the corners folding inward, the air stale and dead, exhaled too many times. She kept catching herself doing things she didn't remember deciding to do, rearranging the table, moving the mattress, closing doors she didn't remember opening. Once she woke with dust under her fingernails and the vent cover on the floor. The shoebox was back inside the duct, as if she had carefully put it there. She didn't remember doing that. But the box hadn't walked back on its own. That was what scared her most now. Not that the apartment was changing, but that it was making her part of the process. Another component it was rearranging. Another piece of furniture it was finding a place for. When she listened very hard, she felt she could hear echoes behind the plaster. Not voices, but the sense of others. People who had stood where she stood, who thought they were getting a second chance with cheap rent and no questions. People who had left notes and tapes and warnings that no one came in time to read. Clara didn't think anyone had come for them. She didn't think anyone remembered they were here, once the apartment finished with them. She could feel it finishing with her. Her thoughts were getting thinner. She would reread her own scribblings, and they felt like someone else's story. She would catch her reflection out of the corner of her eye and not recognize herself. For a split second, she saw someone older, or younger, or someone who wasn't her at all. She didn't know how her story would end, whether a body would be found, or if the landlord understood what this place did, or simply saw tenants arrive and new listings appear when they moved out. All she knew was that the apartment didn't like emptiness. It filled itself. With belongings. With memories. With people who thought they had nowhere else to go. If, by some impossible twist, anyone ever read her fragmented words, if any of this sounded familiar, if they ever walked into a too cheap, too empty place and felt it watching them back, she had a desperate plea: don't come looking for her. Don't try to find the Pendulum Lofts, apartment 3B. Don't answer any listing that sounded like hers. And if they ever saw a studio advertised as vacant, long-term, immediate move-in, no questions asked, for far less than it should cost, run. The apartment was empty again, in the end. And it was waiting. Wanting. Wanting. Sarah lived deep in the Blackwood Forest, her small cabin accessible only by a winding, narrow track that disappeared into the dense trees. No other homes were near enough to catch her light at night. No cars passed after dark. That's why she loved hiking the trails back there, because it felt utterly empty. One Tuesday, she lingered on her hike longer than intended. Dusk fell quickly, and the forest grew unnervingly quiet. The kind of silence that amplifies every beat of your own heart. No birds chirped. No insects buzzed. Just the soft click of branches shifting in the still air. That's when she heard footsteps. Not behind her. Not chasing. Matching hers. Sarah stopped. The footsteps stopped. She tried to convince herself it was a wandering deer, or perhaps just her overactive imagination. She even laughed aloud, just to hear another human sound cut through the oppressive quiet. Then the footsteps laughed too. Not a human sound, more like an echo of the concept of laughter, abruptly cut short, as if the mimic didn't quite understand its cadence. She didn't run. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps a primal fear suggested that if she ran, it would learn how. Instead, she walked. Slowly back toward the trailhead. Every step she took, it took one too. Always behind her. Always the same distance away. When the pines thinned enough for her to see her old Jeep, the sound abruptly ceased. Sarah turned around. There was nothing there. The drive home felt longer than usual. Her headlights kept catching fleeting movements between the trees, just at the edge of the beam. She told herself she was still keyed up, still scared. When she pulled into her driveway, the single cabin lantern above her door was glowing. Sarah never left it on. The heavy wooden door hung slightly ajar. She stood there for a long time, listening. Nothing. Inside, everything looked the same. No mess. No signs of a break-in. But the air felt wrong, like a room after a bitter argument. Heavy. Waiting. She locked the door and checked every room. The last place she looked was the bedroom. The wardrobe door in her bedroom stood wide open. Sarah didn't remember opening it. From within, something seemed to subtly shift its weight. She backed out slowly and slept on the couch with every light on. She barely slept at all. Every time she drifted off, she kept hearing breathing that wasn't hers, too slow, too heavy, coming from somewhere deeper inside the small dwelling. In the morning, the wardrobe door was closed. Sarah told herself she'd imagined it. That night, she heard the footsteps again. Not outside. In the corridor. She held her breath. The footsteps did the same. Then something scraped lightly along the wall, like fingers learning the texture of paint. It stopped outside her bedroom door. Then, her own name, Sarah, whispered from just beyond the wood. It sounded wrong, like a word someone had heard but never understood, stretched and reassembled by an alien tongue. "I know you're awake," it said. Sarah stayed still until the sun came up. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, things had moved when she wasn't looking. Cupboard doors left ajar. The washing mirror fogged over without anyone having used the shower. She'd hear it walking through the cabin, stopping when she stopped, standing when she stood. Always learning. Last night, Sarah finally spoke to it. She asked what it wanted. A long, chilling silence followed. Then, from directly behind her, it answered, "I want to go back, but I don't know how to be alone." Sarah didn't turn around. She didn't think it liked when she looked at it, because now it stood in doorways when her eyes were closed. And tonight, it had asked if it could try sleeping in her bed. Sarah didn't answer. The cabin went quiet in a way that made her ears ring. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and her own heart trying to punch its way out of her chest. She didn't sleep. Sometime before dawn, a faint metallic scent, like old copper, began to permeate the air. Sarah followed it to the bathroom. The washing mirror was covered in handprints, not smeared, but pressed. Each print showed too many fingers, overlapping, as if it hadn't yet settled on the correct number. Some prints were darker than others, wet. The sink was running. In the basin, something dark pulsed with the running water, a deer's tongue. It looked cleanly removed, thick and swollen, but its base appeared chewed and ragged, as if whatever had taken it hadn't known where to finish. Pinned to the mirror with her hairbrush was a note, scrawled in something sticky and dark. This part was the AZ. Sarah vomited until her throat burned. Behind her, the floorboards creaked. She didn't turn around. "You didn't leave me enough," it said, sounding irritated. "I tried to copy it, but it rots when I do it wrong." Then, something warm dripped onto Sarah's shoulder. Blood. Not fresh, but cold and already starting to clot. She ran. Sarah raced into her bedroom, slamming the door shut and shoving the heavy chest of drawers against it. She could hear it moving through the cabin, not walking anymore. Dragging. Scraping. Like something pulling pieces of itself along that didn't fit right. It slammed into the door once. Then again. On the third impact, a wet, sickening squelch echoed through the small space. "I don't like this shape," it muttered. "It hurts to keep." The bottom of the doorframe began to darken, seeping a thick, red fluid as if the very wood itself were bleeding. Sarah screamed for it to stop. It did. She heard tearing. Wet. Slow. Patient. Then, the sound of chewing. Sarah sat there, hands clamped over her ears, shaking uncontrollably as it fed, making small, frustrated noises when its teeth scraped against bone. When it spoke again, its voice was almost Sarah's own. "Better," it rasped. "You do it cleaner than the animals." The chest of drawers scraped across the floor, sliding away from the door on its own. The door slowly swung inward. It stood there, wearing her. Sarah's face hung loose on its head, stretched grotesquely wide across the jawline. One eye was hers. The other was a cloudy, black orb, blinking out of sync. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, bones pushing against the skin as if desperate to escape. A dark pool of blood spread at its feet, reaching across the floorboards like slow, wet fingers. I practiced smiling, it said, pulling at its lips until the skin at the corners tore with a wet sound. People like that. Sarah begged it to leave. It tilted its head in imitation of curiosity. But then you'd be alone, it said. And I learned that hurts. You taught me that part. It stepped closer. Sarah smelled rot and pine and her own sweat. You taught me that part. She didn't remember passing out. Sarah woke in the deep forest, naked, shivering, and covered in dried blood that wasn't entirely her own. Her cabin keys were gone. Her phone was gone. Footprints led away from her, towards the distant track. They were wearing her hiking boots. The local deputy said she likely had a psychotic break, mutilated some local wildlife. Claimed the general store's security footage showed her buying supplies last night. But the thing on the tape had smiled too wide, and when she finally made it back to her cabin, the locks had been changed. Someone inside was humming, wildly off-key, while scraping something sharp along the interior walls, practicing. Evelyn's remote cottage by the sea was far enough removed from the frantic pace of the cities that the world's quiet dissolution felt more like a slow retreat than a sudden cataclysm. There were no sirens here, no panicked shouts, just a profound quietude that settled over the rugged coast like an unwelcome blanket. The last flickering news reports had spoken in hushed, scientific tones about a celestial body, a gravitational anomaly, the planet's very fabric beginning to unravel. Eventually, the warning ceased, replaced by somber, heartfelt thanks for our understanding and our quiet dignity. Evelyn awoke before the sun, not by choice, but because Buster, her elderly terrier mix, was already up. He stood by her bed, tail a gentle pendulum, ears pricked, his gaze fixed on her with that familiar, patient insistence. "All right, old boy," she murmured, pushing herself up. Outside, the dawn sky was a shade Evelyn had never witnessed, not the vibrant hues of a new day, nor the angry grays of a coming storm, but a bruised, ethereal violet, as if the light itself was struggling to break through an ancient, clouded pane. The gulls were silent, the usual chorus of cicadas absent. The very air felt muted. The old transistor radio on the kitchen counter still crackled to life. No cheerful morning shows, no advertisements. Just a calm, synthesized voice repeating a singular message. Immediate infrastructure failure. Recovery impossible. Thank you for your understanding. Evelyn reached out and gently twisted the dial, silencing it. Buster shadowed her every move, his nails a soft tap-tap on the wooden floors, occasionally bumping her leg with his head when she paused. Evelyn fed him his breakfast. He devoured it with his usual gusto, then nudged the gleaming, empty bowl towards her, a satisfied wag of his tail conveying his achievement. They stepped out into the morning. The coastal scrub, usually alive with rustling leaves and scuttling creatures, was unnervingly inert. Not dead, but hollowed out. The stunted pines stood in perfect, windless stillness. From somewhere far across the water, a low, metallic groan echoed, stretched impossibly thin and vast. Buster trotted ahead, nose to the ground, sniffing at nothing discernible. As mid-morning approached, the strange violet light began to dim even more, deepening to an indigo hue. Shadows, detached from their sources, elongated and warped. Evelyn's old flip phone blinked out, its signal long gone, its battery now inert. A faint, acrid scent, like ozone mixed with old pennies, permeated the air. Evelyn settled onto the small porch swing, leaning back against the cottage door. Buster curled up tightly beside her, his soft weight a comfort, and soon drifted into sleep. He was oblivious to the subtle, increasing pressure in the atmosphere, or the way the ocean horizon appeared to curve inward, as if the world itself was a fragile glass globe. His legs twitched, his paws paddled at invisible ground. Evelyn pictured him chasing phantom squirrels, or galloping across sunlit beaches after a favorite ball, her own laughter ringing in those imagined spaces. When the final approach began, it wasn't a roar, but a profound vibration. A low hum resonated deep in Evelyn's bones. A silent chord struck across the entire landscape. The distant pines, then the nearby bushes, bowed inward as if caught in an impossible vacuum. The indigo sky deepened, then bled into an absolute lightless black. It felt as though the very globe they rested upon was being cradled, gently but inexorably. Buster stirred, stretched luxuriously, and gave Evelyn's hand a soft, warm lick. Evelyn buried her face in his scruffy fur, inhaling the familiar, earthy scent of him. Warm, loyal, utterly alive. "I'm here, boy," she whispered into his ear. He responded with a soft thump-thump of his tail against the wood. And as the ultimate darkness descended, Buster never understood the why. He only knew the comfort of being warm, nestled close, and utterly not alone, as the quiet world around them simply ceased to be. Julian had always been excessively protective of Lena. Any time they left the house, he'd insist on accompanying her, even for the most mundane errands. One afternoon, their drive took them past the Gilded Relic, a small antique shop. Its window display, crammed with vintage pocket watches and intricate music boxes, drew Lena's gaze instantly. A particularly delicate porcelain figurine caught her eye, almost glowing amidst the shadows. "Could we stop here?" she asked, pressing her nose to the glass. Julian raised an eyebrow, his expression a familiar mix of caution and mild annoyance. "Antiques? Why?" Lena shrugged playfully. "They're just so unique." With a reluctant sigh, Julian pulled the car to the curb, his disapproval palpable. "If you're so intent on collecting, we can visit Retro Revival on the way back for some proper pieces." Lena just laughed, already opening her door. "Relax, I'll only be 10 minutes. She didn't wait for a reply, slipping inside the shop. Inside, Lena gravitated towards a display cabinet, housing an array of old music boxes and fragmented curios. Reaching for a tarnished silver locket, she immediately pricked her finger on a sharp, ornamental finial. At their home, she often spotted discarded ceramic figurines in the dusty corners, but Julian would never let her touch them. She would only get as far as examining them from a distance, her fingers itching to clean and restore them, before he would firmly guide her away, wiping her hands clean with a pre-moistened cloth from his pocket. Julian didn't allow her to keep any delicate artifacts or vintage trinkets at their house. She watched their shelves slowly fill with nothing but dust and neglected relics. He wouldn't even let her clear them away, their silent decay spreading like a pall over the rooms. "Lena?" A male voice startled her, and she turned to see a man roughly her age. His accent was distinctly British, catching her off guard. Mid-20s, perhaps a recent graduate. Thick blonde curls framed a thoughtful face. Despite the cool spring air, he wore a short-sleeved shirt and jeans. Her eyes were drawn to the vibrant yellow-green ink across his forearm, a compass, its needle pointing north, the intricate design winding down to his fingers. His smile, as he carefully picked up a small, chipped porcelain doll, held a profound sadness. Lena was surprised by the practiced ease with which his fingers handled the fragile doll. "It's nice to see you again," he murmured. Before she could react, he pulled her into a hug, and Lena stiffened, frozen in his embrace. He sniffled into her shoulder, and a startling realization jolted her. She knew of his touch. An icy sensation slithered down her spine. The reassuring grip of his arms, the familiar shuddery breath tickling the back of her neck. "I didn't think you'd ever return," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But I had a feeling you'd find your way back to us." Lena stumbled back, her cheeks burning. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. She fought to regain composure, ignoring the screaming protest of her nerve endings. Her brain was alight with the terrifying truth: she did know him. She recognized his slightly gruff tone, the high-pitched catch in his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when she made him smile. She forced herself to shake the thoughts away. I think you're mistaken." His expression crumbled, tears welling in his eyes. "You." He ran a hand through his blonde curls, swiping at his nose. Bloody hell, Lena, you don't know who I am, do you? She could only shake her head, her legs feeling suddenly weak. The antique shop's door flew open, the bell above it jingling a cheerful, yet jarring melody. Running footsteps pounded across the worn wooden floor. Oh my God, Lena. A petite girl with fiery orange pigtails practically launched herself into Lena's arms. She appeared to be the same age, dressed in overalls adorned with tiny clockwork gears, a similar gear tattooed on her wrist. She burst into tears, and Lena's body involuntarily convulsed against the force of her embrace. I never thought I'd see you again. And Lena knew Hera too. Her familiar hugs, the sweet scent of her hair. Lena found her voice, though it was hoarse. I don't understand. Instead of answering, the girl quickly pulled down Lena's sleeve, revealing a small, intricately designed clockwork gear tattooed just below her elbow. Lena had never seen it before. Julian always made sure Lena's eyes were averted when she changed. He'd insisted on long sleeves, even in the height of summer, and had often bandaged her arms for no apparent injury. Lena, the girl whispered, pulling her into another tight hug. Don't you remember us? A bad man took you 3 years ago. We searched everywhere, but it was like you'd vanished. The man, now identified as Finn, grabbed Lena's hand, squeezing it tightly. We're going, he murmured, before he can take you away again. Somehow, Lena allowed Finn and the girl to lead her outside. Her body seemed to respond instinctively. She knew their touch. She knew they were safe. Julian, on the other hand, had never truly made sense. He hated anything old or antique. Finn and Zoe, they were her friends. Finn gently guided Lena into the back seat of his car, while Zoe scrambled into the front. Get rid of your phone, Finn whispered, starting the engine, in case he tracks you. Lena nodded numbly, pulling out her phone. A text from Julian lit up the screen. Julian, I'm sorry to be overprotective. I'm not allowed to say much. A psychopath took you away. You and 2 others. He renamed you after artifacts, branded 3 of you, brainwashed you. The others were never found, but I found you. I never gave up. And I'm never letting you go again. As Lena's eyes grew heavy, another text popped up. As Julian, I've got you coffee. Where are you? Lena. Finn's voice echoed, distant, as her head lolled against the window. Her phone slipped from her numb fingers, her lungs suddenly starved for air. A memory, sharp and terrifying, bloomed in the back of her mind, a dim, dusty chamber filled with ticking mechanisms and forgotten relics. Cold iron manacles clamped around her wrists, the metal biting into her skin. A warm head had rested on her shoulder, and a voice had whispered for her never to forget his true name. His shuddery breaths had tickled her skin. I'm Liam, the voice splintered into a sob, echoing through the confined space. Don't let me forget. With numb hands, Lena tried the car door. It was locked. Don't worry, Lena, Finn hummed, a wide grin spreading across his face. Zoe burst into high-pitched giggles from the front seat. We're taking you back to the curator. Marion, quick, come here. What, Theron? Can't you manage the birthing yourself? Come here. Her boots crunched in the fresh snow as she hurried towards the barn. What is the matter? Theron averted his gaze to the straw-covered ground. Oh my God. Theron, that's a stillborn black lamb. Marion fell to her knees, burying her face in her hands. The Sirkin will come. Marion, he doesn't have to come. If our oldest daughter is... No, Theron, we can't do that to Helga. Marion, think of our other children. Think of the little boys. Theron, why? Why us? A wave of cold dread seized Theron's body. We need to act today, he roared, his voice echoing in the barn. Marion slowly got to her feet and stumbled back towards the cabin, her sobs trailing behind her. The empty, dull eyes of the lamb stared at Theron. He picked it up, retrieved his shovel, and walked to the back door of the barn. 20 paces ahead, 6 paces to the left, and 6 paces to the right. He measured each step with grim accuracy. Upon taking the last stride, he began digging 6 feet down. There he placed the lamb's small body, marking the spot. The post had to be brought later. Marion prepared it in the cabin, lying on the floor, clutching Helga's old scarf. After she woke, Theron told Helga to go rest and that he would care for the boys. She seemed surprised, but relieved. At 9, the younger sons were tucked into their beds. Marion was still weeping in the cabin. Theron gently led her to bed. She wouldn't be of any help now. Before he asked Helga to come to the barn, he had already prepared the rope and the gag. "What do you need from me, father? Come here, sit beside me, my daughter." He put his hand on her shoulder as he used to when she was a little girl. "I have some unfortunate news," he began softly. "One of the ewes bore a stillborn black lamb today." Helga's body instantly shook. She looked at him, her eyes wide with terror. "Father, please don't." She already knew his dreadful decision. "Helga, you have to think of your little brothers." Tears streamed down her cheeks. Theron pulled the rope from under the bench. She clenched her fists and bit down on her lip. Blood trickled down her jaw as he wrapped her hands. She didn't put up a physical fight. He knew his little girl would understand. "Father, please," she whispered, staring at him as he bound her to the rough wooden post at the forest's edge. Her fingers were already turning white from the cold. He couldn't bring himself to look at her for long. Quickly tying the final knot, he walked back to the cabin. Memories of them playing in the clearing behind the cabin flashed before his eyes. His lip began to tremble, but he managed to compose himself. Marion was by the ancient Jurkin painting on the wall, praying fervently. Did she? No, she was strong. I hope she doesn't suffer too long. The morning after, Theron woke earlier than usual. Looking out the window, Helga's body was still tied to the post, halfway deep in the snow. When he walked over, she was frozen solid, no breath, no heartbeat, no heartbeat. Jurkin had accepted his sacrifice. His family was safe again.